you're muted, apparently.
Yes, greetings.
Okay, I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Hannah, do you want to, are you able to stay for a bit, a mod, or is it okay if I mod it myself? Okay, in that case, oh, it's time. Okay. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Right, okay. In that case, we are asking whether police brutality doesn't actually exist. And here to argue that it doesn't exist, we have Mal. Thanks for being here. The floor is all yours for your opening statement.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me at this level?
I can hear you. Yeah. Can
Okay.
anybody else? I see. I assume so. So you can start whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time out for this. My position is there's no such thing as police brutality. So, by definition, law enforcement officers, which are police officers, they enforce the law. So, it is an oxymoron that an officer which enforces the law at the same time doesn't. As far as I know, it's a contradiction to what the law is for, which is supposed to keep civility and order. So, officers supposed to protect and serve the people in emergency or police related type matters. To use the expression quote unquote police brutality is a perpetuated colloquial usage of a phrase. It's really a misnomer, just like the phrase Civil War. Is anything about a war, which is killing folks and destruction, is any of that civil? Now, you can call it civil because it's happening in your own backyard, but bloodshed and slaughter is bloodshed and slaughter when you get down to it. There is no law that I know that mandates undue force and or brute force. Now, once a police officer acts outside of what is to be enforced, that person is no longer an officer. That person is no longer operating within the law, within the jurisdiction that they are expected to carry out. Now, for instance, if you are a Catholic or Christian or Muslim, once you stop practicing what makes you one to belong to any of these sects, you're no longer of that. That's another point. Many people say they are something that they're not even practicing to make themselves be that. You can't be a practitioner without practicing, really. So this points us back to the police. People tend to still refer to individuals that don't practice justice as them that enforce justice. Nearly person by the name of Nearly Fuller Jr. Put it this way: he's a author of a code book that is the short title because it's actually a long title to that book. A person he says a person with the title police officer that acts to mistreat you based on the color of your skin is actually a what's called a race soldier. Basically, a race soldier, basically who can be referred to as a white supremacist. That is basically the identification of these race soldiers, typically. So it's not a police officer. A person with the title doctor that performs euthanasia or even abortion of all kinds is not a doctor. A doctor in origin is to heal, not to treat with drugs, easing the symptoms, to live life drugged up or drugged into lethal sleep. Um, I could yield right here. For more information regarding race soldier, upon doing a search in the Google search engine, it's in the Urban Dictionary. That website shows the following: race soldier, any white racist who shows an unusual diabolical zeal to engage in the practice of white supremacy. These actions are likely to but do not necessarily include direct violence against black people or people who are not white. It's likely that race soldiers will violently oppose any civil unrest stems from the police brutality protests. Uh, don't protest. I say don't protest police. I understand that there's a lot of protests going on down through history. The police are the ones who come to your aid, in your defense and your protection. Now, someone posing and impersonating an officer will be revealed uh, when exclaiming police brutality. We see that person as just an imposter of an officer. Okay, I'm finished.
Okay, thank you very much for your speech, and I shall begin my opening statement. The idea that police brutality doesn't exist seems on its face to be absolute nonsense. The main reason for this is because we have so many examples of police brutality against all races. For almost every example of causes célèbres on white on black police brutality, we have similar police brutality against whites and Asians and Hispanics. This is an issue with police culture, particularly in the United States, that extends far beyond the boundaries of race. Whenever a drunken man is pleading and begging for his life while incoherent commanders shout at him until he gets shot in the head straight through his body, and then that gets suppressed at a murder trial, well, that man was a police officer when he did the shooting, or else he wouldn't have had the SWAT gear and the gun and the perceived authority to order someone about like that. Nor would Derek Chauvin have thought he had the perceived authority to put his knee on somebody's neck for no reason. There's no restraint anywhere in the world that requires you to crush somebody's neck. And yet, that's exactly what happened to George Floyd. So, unfortunately for everyone, police brutality exists, and police brutality will continue to exist for as long as the police are being militarized against non existent to negligible threats. And particularly in America, for as long as the Pentagon is selling its cast offs to police precincts all over America. Whenever massive, massive amounts of money are being thrown at small town police departments so that their headquarters look like defense manufacturers. All of this is perpetuating the environment in which police brutality exists. It's what's called in psychology also weapon use bias. Nobody goes out with an assault rifle expecting not to fire it. They're there, and at some point they will be expected to use the gun. That's why they have it. So when police officers go out open carrying machine guns, well, of course they're going to use it. And that doesn't mean they stop being a police officer just because they fire a machine gun at somebody. They are still a police officer. It's what gave them the machine gun. It's also what gave them the perception of authority that's okay for them to fire it into somebody's face. Just ask what happened in Syria. The Syrian police did not stop being police when they started machine gunning people in the face. And it was, in fact that they were police that enabled them to do it in the first place. And the same holds true in countries such as America, where most or all of the police are armed, and from police culture in states where policing by consent, the penite model of Britain, was never a thing. They were considered the thin blue line between order and disorder, such that they must be granted extra powers to preserve that line. And conservatives should care about this precisely because the police, by being police officers, are granted powers and duties above and beyond the average citizen. Police officers can break into your house and machine gun through the wall and call it a no-knock warrant, for instance. A normal person who does that is convicted of murder, whereas police officers routinely aren't even charged, never mind convicted of these murders that they commit. They have the authority to restrain you. They will kick you 20 times in the head and then argue before the Supreme Court that they have qualified immunity because they didn't kick you 25 times in the head, like the last person who was told that who was told that they didn't that they had qualified immunity, but don't do it again. So congratulations. And then the next one will just kick you 15 times in the head, and they will argue that they still have qualified immunity. And until very recently, the US Supreme Court was content to split these hairs. If the police in, I think it was Arkansas, are seriously arguing that having somebody wallowing in his own feces for several days, they spit at and taunt him, is gives them qualified immunity. How much further depths do we have? And we can't just dodge the entire question and say these people weren't police officers. Of course they were. This is what gave them the perceived authority to do it. Is what gave them the arrogance to believe that what they were doing was right. It was the badge, it was the culture, and it was decades and decades and decades of Supreme Court jurisprudence that says that they don't actually have any obligation to respond to 911 calls, but they can stomp you 20 times in the head and be the first one to get away with it, as long as the last one was told he was going to be the only person to get away with it, cough, by immunity cough, only did it 25 times in the head. So the idea that police brutality doesn't exist is contradicted by all the evidence of what these police officers do. And they haven't ceased being police officers just because they're being brutal. And unfortunately, they have got away with it for so long. And they continue to get away with it. And precisely because they continue to get away with it, they will continue to do it. And conservatives in particular should care about this precisely because the police should be given the minimum powers necessary for the exercise of their functions, in particularly a tradition in America of liberty and of restraining the state. The whole point is to give the minimum amount of power needed and to have that power exercised in the way that justifies its existence. And its existence is only justified by the careful application of where it is absolutely necessary, or else we end up in the very kind of police states that the American Revolution was popularized to be against, and the libertarian strain of conservatism today is very much against. To be a to advocate that police brutality doesn't exist on technical grounds is incoherent. To argue that police brutality doesn't exist because what these people are doing isn't actually brutality is to give carte blanche for the next Stalin to rise. And on that, I will end my opening statement, and I look forward to our open discussion.
I'm gonna say uh, in a short response, I would ask myself, you know, who or what is a police officer? What does
A police officer. Okay, well, who is a police officer to you?
a police officer? He or she is someone that is enforcing the law. The law in that jurisdiction is a law enforcement officer.
So if anybody purports to detain somebody for any reason, do they automatically become a police officer?
Say that question again.
purports to detain another person on suspicion of breaking the law, are they a police officer?
You're asking if anybody detains anybody, are they police officers? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, do they become a police officer? If I detain somebody across the street because I think they've committed a crime, am I a police officer?
In that context, no. I don't believe you are.
Okay, yes, that's correct. I am not a police officer. Um, so that, but even though I was purporting to enforce the law, so surely the whole point is that the police officers are people that have been specifically given authority to do this, and they assert this authority through their badge, through their uniform, and through the fact of their employment by a police department. And by that token, every time the police officer wears his uniform and goes on duty, he is being a police officer until he takes it off.
Okay, so is there a law that a citizen must detain who they believe they should detain?
It is so in many jurisdictions it is permissible for citizens to detain people while they wait for police to arrive.
But is it a law? Is it required?
It is a law. It's not required for the police to detain anybody. The police can walk away if they want.
No, not for the police. Is it a law or requirement for a citizen to detain somebody for whatever justifiable reason?
No, and it is not a requirement for the police to do it either.
It is. The
No,
lo-
it
the
isn't,
the
please, sir.
officer
There
the officer of the
are
law
decades of Supreme Court jurisprudence on this. The police don't even have to answer your 911.
the officer of the law has to enforce the law, and the way they do that is by detaining any person that appears to be breaking the law. The law does not require
But
a
they don't,
citizen
in
to
fact.
act as an
Uh,
officer. The law does not
so
require
yeah,
the law
sorry.
does not require an officer to be brutal. It actually is breaking the law to be brutal. So therefore, in the nature of an officer, it's not really a brutal police officer. It's a person that
But that
holding the
doesn't make any
title of
sense.
police officer being brutal.
But that doesn't make any sense. The law does not require the police to do anything, actually, unless they're specifically ordered to by a judge. The vast majority of arrests, while they get arrest warrants, the police are not ordered to enforce it. This is
So
not
they're
like a
not
death
law
warrant
enforcement
where.
officers. Is that what you're saying?
So law enforcement officers, whenever they ask for arrest warrants, they request permission to arrest. They don't demand. The judge does not demand that this person gets arrested. And in fact, the vast majority of arrests are not pursuant to arrest warrants. They are pursuant to the police picking people up on the scene. So the police are doing what they are permitted but not mandated to do. They do not have to do this, but they can do it, as can an ordinary citizen in most jurisdictions. So it really seems like you're splitting hairs to say you stop being a police officer the moment you're doing, which is silly, really.
So police officers, as being police officers on duty, they can allow you to just break the law because they're not law enforcement officers.
But they do it all the time. They do it all the time. And if they didn't do it, the jails would be even more full than they already are because too much is criminalized.
So I can break the law in front of an officer because they're not required by law to stop me. That officer can actually be
Yes,
justified in not acting as an officer.
he can't. He doesn't have an obligation to trust you. No, he doesn't. But that doesn't mean he's not a police officer. It just means that maybe all you did was throw chewing gum into a river or something, and he thinks it would be stupid to arrest you for it. I mean, it's not like you're walking around with a bloody knife in your hand. You probably committed a murder.
Well, that would be the same situation because that would be if I've broken the law such as murder, that officer is not obligated by his position or his occupation to act to enforce the law.
There is there is no specific obligation on him to arrest you unless he is specifically given an order by a DA or a judge.
So what you're saying is that the law is really non-existent until there is an order to make it existent. Many of us that are walking around can just
What I'm
break the law in the presence of officers and
what
they
I'm
don't even have to
saying
act.
what I'm saying is that there's a difference between criminal law criminalizing something and a purported obligation to immediately arrest people. The first one exists, the second one doesn't. That undercuts your argument that, oh, the police have about what these alleged obligations of police officers are. The police can do whatever they are permitted to do by jurisdiction. They are usually not mandated to do things, but they don't stop being a police officer whenever they stray outside of that, any more than I stop being an employee of my workplace if I start stealing their files. I don't stop being an employee. It's precisely because I'm still an employee that I can be punished for doing it.
You stop being an employee once you're not in line with the nature of your employment. Just like a police officer
Nope.
is not in alignment with the nature of their occupation, which is law enforcement. And what I'm getting from you is
I keep my
I
job
can
until I
murder
lose my job.
I can murder somebody in front of a police officer, and that police officer does not have to act, does not have to enforce the law. That's what I'm getting from you.
Legally, he doesn't.
But I have
That's
not
the law.
seen any
The law is
evidence
that
that an
legally he
officer
doesn't.
will not act to enforce the law. Because that's the point of them taking the role in the first place. They don't take the role not to enforce the law, they take the role to enforce it. That's the whole
Yes,
point
but
of
wait,
being an
but
officer. So there really is no logic or justification for taking a role that you actually have a capacity where you will not act. That's the whole point of taking the role. If you're not going to act, don't take the role. Same thing with
if you
being a
tell a
Christian.
civil
Don't
servant,
be a Christian or
there
don't
was a
be a
civil
Christian
servant
if you're
who
not going to
died who was
practice the
employed for
belief of
30
Christian.
years without ever going to his desk. He remained a civil servant until he was found out for never going to his desk for 30 years. He only stopped being a civil servant when he was caught. So this idea that the moment you stop doing your job, you stop having the job, it's absurd.
You're not doing the role is which the point of your role that you have. Like police officers get their orders from wherever. We understand that. But where they get their orders from, they're not going to that's what those people that are chiefs or captains or whatever they get their orders from, they're going to continue to act in their role so they can send out their delegates to act in their role. That's why they take the role. So
So if
it's
I get
all a
elected
system that works
sheriff of
together
the
to enforce the law. That's what a police officer
so
is. A police officer, a
so
person that is brutal and is not acting in accordance to the law, they may hold the title police officer or race soldier, but they're not actually that. It's
they are a police
oxymoronic.
officer, and that's precisely how they were able to do what they were able to do.
It's not about what they're able to do, it's about what the nature of their job is. What is a police
Which for
officer?
too many police
What is
officers
a
is
police
to
officer?
abuse power.
What is a police officer?
A police officer is anybody wearing the badge and the uniform acting under the instruction of their supervisor. That's a police officer. It is a status based distinction. The same way that a soldier is anybody wearing a military uniform at any time. Everyone working in the Pentagon right now in the filing room would being legitimate target if the USA was at war. The fact that these people are performing functions that could be performed by civilians is of no consequence. The moment the person puts the uniform on, they are a soldier, and they stop being a soldier when they leave the army. The same goes for the police, except they can go home at the end of the day.
And you said the officer receives orders, is that correct?
So the police officer will receive orders from the DA, yes.
Okay, and what are those orders?
Whatever orders are given that day.
What orders would they be? Would they be orders to
So
serve the
if
law or
so,
not serve the law?
let me run a hypothetical by you.
No,
If
hold the hypothetical. Hold your
if
hypothetical.
Sheriff Joe Arpaio,
Hold your
who's purportedly the
hypothetical.
toughest sheriff in Arizona, if he orders the police to raid somebody's apartment and rough them up a bit, are they police officers if they obey that
Hold
law?
your hypothetical because
Or
I
are
had
they
another
police
question.
officers if they don't obey that command?
Hold your hypothetical because I had another question. I wasn't finished. So those
So
orders are
hypothetically,
with the law or are they against the law?
so when are they? Do they lose their police officer status if they rough them up, even though the sheriff told them to do it? Or do they lose their police officer status by disobeying the sheriff and not beating them up?
Are those orders within the law or outside the law?
They are outside the law, but they happen all the time.
Orders are outside the law?
And they happen all the time. They get given to police officers all the time. They get told to rough people up or to intimidate them or equivalent. And people worship the sheriffs that do this as tough people and good examples, and it's absurd, but that's reality. Sheriffs can say, I'm going to beat up all the drug dealers, and they will cruise into the office.
So is police officers are supposed to so 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 when we talk about law enforcement, because that's the way I'm
Yes.
talking about police officers. So you're giving it's like you're really transforming what a nature of a police officer is. You're changing it to just somebody that just takes orders from higher up instead
I'm
of
giving the
actually
correct
being a law
definition of
enforcement. And
police
I'm talking about
officer.
law enforcement. If you're talking about something besides law
So am
enforcement
I.
and you're calling that police, you calling that police, you're talking about something totally different.
Because it is.
Yeah,
It's
I'm
an
talking
use
about
of
law
law
enforcement
enforcement power.
officers. I'm talking about
Well,
police
that's what it
officers
is.
that are law enforcement. You're talking about something else.
Yes, I'm talking about the real world in which
I'm
police
talking about
officers
so my
break
position
the
has
law
nothing to
all the
do with
time.
that. My position is about law enforcement officers who are police. They are not brutal.
But they are. That's the problem.
Not
The
law
problem
enforcement
is that
officers.
they are. So if we're only talking about what is within the law, acting within the law, if the Supreme Court grants qualified immunity to the first police officer to stamp on the suspect's head 20 times, am I a police officer if I only stamp on the next suspect's head 19 times?
If it's outside of the law, no.
But we don't know if it's outside of the law yet because the Supreme Court only ruled that 20 stamps on the head should be illegal.
So what does the law say?
Well, any person with more than a few brain cells to rub together would say that you shouldn't be stamping on heads at all. But police
What does the
officers
law
have routinely,
say?
but the first police officer to be sued has routinely been granted qualified immunity under the 11th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution.
What does the law say?
So the law as interpreted in the Constitution essentially says that the first public official to break a rule is granted immunity in their instant case, but any future official that breaks the rule will not be granted immunity. That's what qualified immunity is. That's why it's qualified, because only one person gets it. But in the past, we have had police officers in America stomp on people's head 30 times and then they're told, oh, that qualified immunity. So he gets away with it, but don't do it again. And then somebody else stomps on somebody's head 25 times and they have argued before the Supreme Court that they should be entitled to qualified immunity too because you only said it was wrong to stamp on somebody's head 30 times. And in the past, the Supreme Courts in the 50s and the 60s have agreed with that nonsense. So if there's qualified immunity for 20 stomps on the head, and the next police officer only stomps on somebody's head 19 times, is he still a police officer?
Depends on the law. That's why I keep asking, what does the law say? If it's in the law and they're a law enforcer, then they're within their role.
So is stomping on somebody's head 19 times brutal?
I don't know.
You don't know? If I stamped you on the head 19 times, do you think you would use the word
You
brutal
notice how you're
to
moving away from
describe
what the
it?
law says? I keep asking you, oh, what does the, because all I'm arguing is law enforcement. Everything you're talking about has
Can
nothing to
the
do with law
law
enforcement. So even if you go to
can
your
the law
hypothetical,
permit brutality?
even if you go to your hypothetical and say that was in the law, then I would say, okay, the law enforcement officer is acting within the law. Do you get it?
Can he be brutal and act within the law at the same
If
time?
that's all in the law, if that is in, get this. If it is in the law, that law enforcement officer is acting within the law.
So is it wrong to
In
enforce?
reality, as you said, that brutality is not in the law. So police officers, which are law
So
enforcement officers, can't be brutal. But there are
yes, they
people
can.
that hold the title and namesake police officers are brutal. And people above them are
I
brutal.
machine
And people above them are brutal if they're giving orders
as
outside of the
are
law.
the
If they're
police
giving orders
officers.
outside of the law. If they're giving orders
So
outside
if
of
I
the law,
take the
those people that are higher up are in namesake as well. They're not a part of
so
the
if I
justice
take your
system
door down
either.
and a no knock warrant a machine gun through you, kill your wife, am I being brutal? Are no knock warrants potentially brutal, even if they're legal?
I don't know.
Is would enforcing the Fugitive Slave Act have been brutal?
I don't know.
Would returning slaves who escaped from plantations be brutal?
I don't know.
How can you not know?
Because
Like
I'm not talking
these are
about what is
basic,
brutal and not
basic
what is brutal. I'm
questions.
talking about are law enforcement officers brutal? And you have not found a
Yes,
law that says you must be brutal to citizens. I see where it
but
says
you don't
protect
have
and
to. It
serve.
doesn't have to
That's
be
what
in the
law
law that
enforcement
you must
officers
be
do.
brutal.
And you're arguing that you can break the law in front of a police officer and they won't do anything. I don't see no evidence for that.
There's plenty of evidence for it. It happens all the time. Police officers let people off with warning all the time,
Those aren't
and
police
they can't
officers.
not, or else there'd be too many people in prisons.
Those aren't police officers.
Yes,
Everything
they
that's happened
are
down
police
through the
officers.
history, through the 50s and 60s, those weren't police officers. Those what you call white supremacists, wearing the title.
But they were
This
police
is where a
officers.
lot of you get it twisted. They wear the title. They're not police officers. You're
How are
conflating
they?
all the language up.
But the only reason they were able to be brutal to civil rights protesters with an expectation that they would get away with it, many of them getting away with it, is because they were police officers.
Just because
These
they
were
wear the
not random
title,
people in a lynch mob. These were
that's
uniformed
why they were
police
able to get
officers.
away with it.
But they did. They got away. Most of them got away with it.
Yeah, wearing a title can help you get away with it, sure. Doesn't mean that's what you are.
Yes, it does. That's why they got away with it. They got away with it because they were police.
Wearing a title can help you get away with it. Doesn't mean that's what you are. You can call yourself a Christian all day, but you don't practice anything of Christian values. You're not a Christian. That's what you call yourself. There's a difference between what you
But if
call
you
yourself
sin,
and what you are. That's my position.
so by your logic, if you committed one sin, you would stop being a Christian. That is nonsense.
That's what a Christian mean. What does being a Christian mean?
Being a Christian means believing in the historical reality of Jesus and in believing in his claims of being the prophet, of being the Son of God, and attempting to live your life by the teachings of Jesus. But if you fail to live up to Christian standards, you don't stop being a Christian. You ask for forgiveness. You don't stop being a Christian.
So it means you can still sin.
Yeah, Christians can sin. They sin all the time because they're
Okay, well,
people.
if you can keep sinning, then yeah, you will still be. If that's what Christian means, you will still be a Christian because you still sin.
Then the same holds true for police officers. Police officers can sin by going outside the law, and they're still police officers.
A Christian can still sin if that's what a
And
Christian
still be
means.
Christian.
If that's what a Christian means, that's the caveat. And if a Christian can, because if a Christian wears the title Christian, but doesn't hold a belief, doesn't have anything to do with, but just calling himself, the person is not a Christian according to what a Christian is.
So, but in order to stop being a Christian, you have to renounce your Christian faith or act in a way that is manifestly outside of Christian doctrine, whereupon you would be excommunicated from the church. If a police officer randomly went on a shooting spree, then in British law we have a doctrine called what the courts have said a frolic of his own, where an employee acts so far outside any remit that the employer is no longer responsible. But that is a high bar. Most crimes committed on the job in British and American law are still left at the feet of the employer. You have to do something really, really, really bad and unexpected for the vicarious link between the employer and the employee to be severed. The same goes for the police. Beating somebody up and trying to hide behind the badge doesn't mean they're not a police officer. But if you tried to hijack an airplane, it would probably not be the police's responsibility.
Down through the 50s, 60s, 70s, and to the present day, all these things have gone on with Mr. King and Walter Scott and George Floyd. Uh,
Doesn't mean they weren't police officers.
the person
They
that
were police
was
officers.
the person that was being brutal. What he had his person on his neck. If that is not according to the law, that person is not enforcing the law. So they're not an enforcement officer, which is a police officer.
But they are a police officer because they're still employed by the police department. They still have the badge, and it was that very authority as a police officer that made Derek Chauvin think he'd get away with it. He was a police officer, and that's the problem.
If those were really police officers, I wouldn't want to call 911 because police officers are brutal.
That's why many people don't. Because the police officers are because of any job which allows you to inflict force upon other people is disproportionately likely to attract people that enjoy doing it.
People do call 911 because police officers do serve and protect. But
Other people don't because they're afraid that they
if it
won't.
was truly in nature, a police officer was just anyone that can just be brutal, not brutal, whatever. A lot of people would just stay away from calling 911.
That's why they do. That's why they do stay away from calling 911.
A lot of people.
People who
Pretty much the average
people
person,
who
which the average person does not. Average person does contact 911.
there are people who don't call 911 because they're afraid that if they call 911, they will get shot. And they have evidence to support that belief. There was I think it was an 18-year-old man in Colorado called 911 when his car broke down and he was delirious and he was scared and they shot him through his fucking windscreen. So yeah, these people who don't call 911 because they're afraid they'll be the ones coming out in a body bag, they have a justification behind that belief, and the people that shot them don't stop being police officers. And they're only taking that shot because they think they will just retreat behind the blue wall of silence and get away with it.
So you do agree that law enforcement officers can't be brutal, is that right?
Not at all. Not at all.
They can't be? Is that what you're saying?
They 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 can be, and they routinely are, and it's a major problem that needs to be solved by bringing these people before a court, sentencing them to the maximum in the jurisdiction up to and including death, and carrying out any executions that are ordered.
Okay, so you're saying law enforcement officers can be brutal. Okay.
Yes, they
Uh,
can.
uh, no, so what's the law that tells us about being brutal to citizens?
That's not the point. The point is that these people join police departments, get badges, and think they're going to be GI Joe, and they shoot people who they shouldn't shoot. They stamp on people's heads literally. They beat them up, and they retreat behind the blue wall of silence. And the blue wall of silence holds in most cases. These are major problems with the institution of the police that we can't get away with by trying to argue our way out of a wet paper bag unsuccessfully that these people weren't actually police officers.
Do you have any further questions for me?
Okay, so we've gone through the examples of police exceeding their powers. What are your thoughts on, but by the same token, what are your thoughts on the police officers that sat outside Columbine doing nothing, or most recently sat outside the Oakdale High School doing nothing? Are they police officers? Why or why not?
If they weren't law enforcement officers enforcing the law, they were
They
imposters.
thought they were they thought they were enforcing the law.
Well, they thought, and they made them. If they had what you call a lack of judgment, or uh,
That's one way to put
what's
it.
the word I'm looking for? Uh, Short sight, oversight, whatever. That's different.
So the fact that the Oakdale Police Department came in looking like military people with assault rifles and body armor and were scared to go after a school shooter in case he shot, did they stop being police officers?
You said they were scared and didn't know what to do. The police officers.
No, so these people who came in and full body armors and assault rifles to a school shooting, who refused to go into the school in case they got shot, were they police officers?
I do believe it's somewhere in the law that they have to look out for to make sure um, if there's no other way around it and they have to ensure their safety first, I believe they've still acted as officers.
That's not. That's absolute nonsense. The whole point of these people who look like like soldiers having all of this tactical gear and top of the line assault rifles they literally buy from the US military. The whole point of army and armoring these people is for them to go after these people, for them to run into the firing line so they stop shooting kids. It's not legitimate to put on all this body armor, grab a military weapon, and say, I'm scared of being shot.
Well, if they neglected to do their job, then no, they pretty much resigned at that point. Just like if you were an employee, and you not doing your job, then you're pretty much an ex-employee, former employee of that company.
No, you're not. I'll
Even
get
if
a
you still
formal
got the
reprimand.
uniform and badge on, you are now a former employee of what you were supposed to be doing.
No, I'm not. I'm just a bad employee. I'm not a former
You're a
employee.
what?
I'm just a bad one.
Oh, I thought you said
I'm
abandoned.
just a
But
bad employee, not a former employee. I'm just a
uh,
bad one.
you are yeah, the employee or whoever does abandon their duties.
But they're still an employee because they might get a warning. They might not get fired. They might get a warning. Yeah.
Well, it depends on the nature of the act. I mean, if it's because now we can get into how bad it is. I mean, some things from an employer standpoint, if you just did it once, it doesn't matter. I can call you a bad employee, but you just get fired right on the spot. So it really depends on the case.
But I am an employee until I'm fired. The only way for me not to be an employee is for me to resign, me to be fired, or for our company to go under.
Like I said, it depends
That's
on
it.
the incident. If the person has done something that is not punishable by law or something that's supposed to be prosecuted by law, then yeah, that person may still be who they are because they didn't act too far outside the law, which is normally not brutal.
Well, police brutality, punching people in the face as a police officer, happens all the time. And again, the reason it keeps happening is because these police officers act with a justified belief that when they punch the suspect, they will get away with it.
Well, it
They
doesn't
don't
really
stop
matter.
police
It's
officers
not
because they
within the
punch
law
them.
of law enforcement, and I think we know that. So a law enforcement officer wouldn't do that because they enforce the law.
But they do, they would, and they do. That's the problem.
That's not
They do.
enforcing the law, is it?
But that doesn't, you don't stop being a police officer just because
That's not
you cause
enforcing the law,
crisis.
is it?
That's not what a police officer is. A police officer who is employed by the police department, has gone through the training, gone through the qualifications, got the badge, and been empowered by law to do things that ordinary citizens don't have the power to do, like wiretapping, like breaking people's doors down, like shooting at people with an expectation that they'll be backed up unless they did something wrong, for instance, like storming into a school in a tactical gear to stop a school shooter. Oh wait, apparently that's just something police officers don't actually do.
Yeah, that's not what in law enforcement is. So a law enforcement wouldn't do that. You're really just pretty much just stating that you know something can be what it is regardless. Um,
No,
like
I'm
in
just
names,
stating that police
namesake
officers
doesn't
break
really
the law,
register.
and police officers often break the law in such a way that they think they'll get away with it. And historically, the courts have been very, very reluctant to hold these people to account, so they act on the continued belief that they will get away with it, and that belief gets more and more justified as more and more police officers don't get held to account for their crimes.
The law enforcement breaks the law.
Yes, they do.
That's an oxymoron.
No, it isn't.
Law enforcement is not breaking the law; it's enforcing the law.
Unfortunately, people do both.
You have any other questions?
Um, Not really. I think we have one Q&A if you're happy to move to Q&A.
Okay.
Okay, so the only question I can see for stage moderator here is if police officers are defined by enforcing the law, a good percentage of the job is not enforcing the law, such as filing paperwork, patrolling, and investigating. Given that this is true, do police officers stop being police officers for much of their shift, but become them when doing that portion of the job?
If it's all within the law, they don't stop being law enforcement officers.
Okay, reasonably concise. And I mean, I would obviously argue again, I would say no, because yeah, it's like the police officers are not defined by a propositive interpretation; they're defined by a status-based and employment-based interpretation. So if we have no other questions, I'm about ready to wrap up. If you're ready to wrap up.
Yes, once again, thank you, one and all, for taking your time out today.
And yeah, thanks very much for agreeing to have this debate and for showing up. So again, the challenge board is looking pretty empty at the moment. So if anybody wants to post a debate challenge or try to respond to a debate challenge that's already there, you're all more than welcome to. We'll be happy to try to find mods to host your challenges. And with that, thank you all for coming. Thank you all for being here. And I will hopefully see some of you